tonight. We have a budget workshop immediately following that, our public hearing, followed by our planning meeting. So stick around for all the excitement tonight, and I appreciate everyone being here. So if we could ask everyone to please stand for the pledge, and we'll pass it over to Dr. O'Malley.
Good evening, everyone. It's an exciting time of year when you kick off budget season. So we're here for the 24-25 budget workshop number 1. Thanks for all in attendance and all those watching at home. We really wanted to start off this evening just talking about some of our district priorities and then kind of get into the numbers, talking about over the next few workshops that we have, what the budget process is, and what we are looking to accomplish over the course of this process. So I would just start off by saying that in these district priorities, we really start by first and foremost listing the physical and social and emotional safety of our students. That's really first and foremost, because you've heard the concept of Maslow before Bloom. We need our students to be safe, feeling safe, be physically safe before they can attend to instruction in the classroom and be successful academically. We're looking at our curriculum constantly in the programs that we offer. Specifically, we'll talk to you throughout the process about our elementary literacy program and growing and strengthening in those areas. We also have been looking at our learning spaces and kind of reimagining what education looks like through the years. Can we make more inviting learning spaces and create opportunities for students to learn from one another as well? We include some different professional development opportunities for our staff throughout these few workshops that we'll highlight, and also talking a lot about our facilities in the district, how we can maintain what we already have and expand and grow in a safe and clean way throughout our buildings. We also wanted to include this, our last priority really is the collaboration with parents and with the community. We want our schools to be an inviting place where our parents can come in and see all the great learning opportunities that are taking place across the district, and we've included a lot of different highlights of that throughout the budget presentation. So I want to turn it over to Mrs. Pilati, who's going to get into a lot of the different specifics about the budget process, and then we'll get more in depth as we go through these different workshops. I just want to thank her for all of her work in preparing this information this evening as well.
Thank you, Dr. O'Malley. Good evening, everyone. On January 16th, Governor Hochul presented the proposed budget for 2024-25. And overall, the executive budget proposal will increase school aid by $825 million, or 2.4% over the current levels. This aid increase consists of $507 million increase in foundation aid and a $318 million increase in expense-based and other aids. The foundation aid increase in the executive proposal is $420 million less than what the State Education Department had estimated based on the formula under the current law. This is the result of 2 changes the governor had proposed. The governor has proposed 2 changes related to foundation aid, the save harmless reduction and the inflation adjustment change. So going back decades, the state allowed districts to receive the greater of the formula amount of foundation aid, or the amount that they received in the prior year. So this is what save harmless refers to. It's a guarantee of the same amount of foundation aid that you received in the previous year, even when the formula calculates an amount that is less than what you received in the prior year. So in many years, the state also applied a guaranteed minimum increase in foundation aid. Just as an example, last year was year 3 of the governor's phase-in to fully fund foundation aid, which was a very big thing because foundation aid hadn't been fully funded in several decades. And we were always a safe harmless district. We were fully funded in foundation aid, but yet last year, districts who were fully funded in foundation aid still received a minimum increase in foundation aid of 3%. But the executive budget is proposing to reduce the safe harmless amount. Reductions would actually range from 9% to a maximum of 50%. About half of the state school districts would experience reductions in foundation aid, 46% of districts on Long Island. 54% of those districts would actually face the maximum 50% reduction in the Save Harmless funding, and that includes West Islip, unfortunately. So the current law calls for the per pupil foundation amount, which is in the formula, to be increased by the change in the Consumer Price Index. For this year, the change in CPI was 4.1%. However, the governor is proposing to change this inflation adjustment to a 10-year average, excluding the highest and lowest years, and that would lower the inflation adjustment from 4.1% down to 2.4%. This would negatively impact all districts in New York State because it is reducing the amount of foundation aid that we're supposed to receive. So the executive proposal is going to have a profoundly negative impact on our school district budget. Our state aid is proposed and projected to decrease by $3 million overall, or 8.28%. As I mentioned, we have been a Save Harmless district because according to the formula, our foundation aid is calculated at $19.3 million. I don't know if you can see it up there, but it's actually the blue line, the lower line, which is blue. That's what our formula calculates that we should have been getting in foundation aid. But under the current law and the current formula, we are scheduled to get, which we should be receiving, the $26 million, which is the orange line above it. So the difference is our actual Save Harmless amount. That's the difference. It's a $6.7 million difference. And we're facing a $3.4 million reduction in foundation aid. So that's a 50% reduction in our Save Harmless amount. Consistent with previous years, of course, we have three main budget goals. We always strive to have a balanced budget.
So Ms. Maloney, can I just ask a question on that,
Sure.
just so we're clear on that? So obviously that's a drastic change to our numbers.
It is.
What is any process going on in the state to thwart this or correct this, or?
I do speak about it a little bit later on, but I know here we've done, a lot of districts have done the petition with the letter writing, having our constituents and our residents write letters to the governor. Our legislators are advocating for it. I know every one of our groups that we belong to are going to Albany advocating for this to change. Unfortunately, there's a lot of talk that the budget, which is supposed to be out by April 1st, is going to be late this year, which is really going to make it even more challenging because they're talking about mid-April and we really have to adopt by April 16th. So I don't know if there's anything you want to add, Dr. Romanelli, but.
No, I would just add that, all of the local politicians that we've spoken to, including Senator White, Senator Martinez, who is scheduled to come visit us here in the district later this week, Assemblyman Durso, anyone that we've spoken to on this topic has shared that there's bipartisan support for the reinstatement of the hold harmless piece of foundation aid and also the adjustment to the inflation rate as well. That's been negatively affecting us. So we do believe that we're going to have a lot of support from our government officials, and we're hoping that the impact is going to be positive. So we're remaining hopeful that we'll be able to advocate. I know that the board has already written a letter to the governor. We've had some letter writing campaigns from our teachers union. We put out a message to the community as well. Parents have been writing to the governor also, so we really appreciate our community members that have been reaching out as well. And we're just going to keep having those conversations and advocating to get that money reinstated. Thanks.
And it does represent, although our aid is decreasing by $3 million, just the foundation aid decrease is actually $3.4 million. So hopefully if it is reinstated, even just back to base year levels, prior year levels, that would be an increase of $3.4 million,
Okay.
which would be helpful. So just going back to our main budget goals, of course, we want to have a fiscally responsible and operationally efficient budget. We want to maintain and enhance our student programs and services where we can, of course, while staying within the tax cap. Financial transparency is another important budget goal. We always make several documents available on a regular basis on our district website. We have our annual auditors reports, our internal and external auditors reports are both available. Our monthly financial statement district's reserve plan is up on our website, as well as our transparency reports, which are required by New York State. And of course, as we go through this budget process, all of our budget documentation will also be available on our website. And I believe the presentations, the 4 budget workshops are recorded, so whoever could not be here tonight can view that at a later time. As I mentioned, this is just the first of 4 workshops we're going to have. Each year, the process of budget development really starts in the fall. We analyze our budget trends and look at various renewal rates based on historical data and industry projections. We, of course, consider changes in contractual obligations. And in early December, our administrators submit their budgets to central office for review, and we hold several budget meetings with all of the budget builders to go over their proposed budgets. Central office goes through various versions of the budget, line by line, and we continually review the district's staffing needs and evaluate existing programs and services offered throughout the process. As I mentioned, in January, the governor released her proposal for the executive budget, and the board discusses various components of the budget during these budget workshops in February and March. In April, the hopefully state-approved budget is released, and the board will adopt the budget by April 16th. In May, we have to have a budget hearing, and of course, May 21st is our budget vote. So over a decade ago, the tax cap was enacted, and since then, the way you arrive at your expenditure budget is through this formula. Essentially, the very first thing we have to do is estimate and calculate what our restricted tax levy is. We follow a formula to do that. We then add in any anticipated state aid, which unfortunately is decreasing right now, add in any other revenues, any amounts that we're going to appropriate from fund balance, and any use of reserves, so we can use that as a revenue source. And basically, the sum of all of these items is what the district's expenditure budget can be. So as I mentioned, the tax levy came into effect about a little over a decade ago, and it allows a district to increase their property tax levy from one year to the next by 2%, or the rate of inflation, whichever is less. It's based on a multi-step formula put out by the Office of the State Comptroller. And since there are adjustments and exclusions, that same formula will yield different results for different districts. If a district does choose to tax at a rate that's higher than what's calculated by that formula, that's considered piercing the cap, and you need a supermajority to do that. We here in West Islip have never done that before, and the calculation is basically a permanent part of our budget process now. And we have to submit this calculation to New York State by March 1st. This summary is just to show you the components of the formula. So we have the allowable levy growth factor. That's the formula, that's the rate that's used in the formula. And that's the red line. No, it's not that easy to see. The inflation factor is simply the change in CPI. That's your inflation factor, that's the green line. And West Islip's allowable factor is what we have developed after going through the formula. That's the amount we're allowed to increase taxes by, and that's the blue line. And the point of this chart is really just to show you that since we've been dealing with the tax cap, you can see that the green and red lines, the allowable factor in the formula, as well as the inflation factor, have always been very similar. Very similar. That changed just last year for the 2023-24 calculation because, as you can see, inflation jumped to 8%, but yet the allowable levy growth factor was still capped at 2%. And West Islip only increased taxes by 1.87%. And yet again this year, not as bad as last year, but we're still facing a very high inflation factor. You can see it's 4.12%. And again, the growth factor in the formula is capped at 2%, and our tax levy is only going to increase by 1.28%. This is the formula that we are required to do, and we use this to calculate what our estimated levy is going to be. You essentially start off with your prior year tax levy. As I mentioned, that's just the property taxes that were levied by the district for the current school year. We multiply that by the tax-based growth factor. So that 1.0027 number, that's just essentially the full value of taxable real property in the district. It's the increase. So it'll never be less than 1, But for example, you could have growth in full value if you have new construction, or people are making improvements to their homes. So that's what that factor relates to, and that's provided to us by the town. Then you have to add in your pilots. We actually only have one pilot in this district. It's for a veterinarian office on Sunrise Highway. They actually just finished a 10-year pilot, and now they're starting a new one because they did capital improvements. So this next coming year will be year one of another pilot for that same office. So you add in your pilots. You also add in any, you back out any exemptions. That $2.9 million just relates to any local capital costs. That is essentially the cost for us to have debt service payments, the cost to improve our facilities, our capital expenditures made through BOCES, and it also includes a bus purchase last year, and it's net of any building and transportation aid. So you essentially go through and do this, the same thing for the current year. You subtract out your current pilots that you expect to receive next year, as well as the exclusions for the capital costs. The one difference we have this year for the very first time, since I believe we've had the tax cap, is there is a pension exclusion this year. There's an ERS pension exclusion, and that is because the change in the ERS contribution rate exceeded 2%. So ERS contribution rate is going from 13.1 to 15.2. Since it's over the 2% limit, not by much, it's like 2.1, but since there's a small amount that's over, you get to take your ERS salaries for the next year and exclude that 0.1% of them. So it's a very small exclusion, it's about 14,000 as you can see there, but it is something that's new for all districts this year because the rate hasn't increased by more than 2% in several years. So what we're left with is our allowable tax levy limit here in West Islip. It's $93,259,412, or an increase of 1.28%, which, considering inflation, is very low. Just a summary, our tax levy for 24-25 is projected to increase by $1.2 million, or the 1.28%. So, as I mentioned, one of our basic budget goals is, of course, to have a balanced budget, which is required, where your revenues equal your expenses. However, we are facing several challenges this year. The district's tax levy, as I mentioned, is only increasing by 1.28%, but inflation is 4.12%, and that inflation is impacting many areas of our budget. Health insurance rates, for one, change on a calendar year basis, so the last 6 months of the year are never known. That has to be estimated. This year, Empire rates increased 9% for family, 10.5% for individual, but more concerning were the Medicare primary rates for retirees. They had an increase of 23.95% for family and 18.39% for individuals. So that made our health insurance budget line go up tremendously. Our district insurance through NYSER is also estimated to increase another 13% for next year, similar to this year. As I mentioned, the ERS pension rates did increase just over 2%. TRS is going, estimated to go from 9.75 to just about 10.02%, but that's still an estimate. So the first draft of our budget does show that our expenses are much higher than our anticipated revenue, and it is leaving us with a significant budget gap. But of course, the budget process is fluid and is not yet complete. We have already looked to reduce controllable costs, and we are going to be maximizing the use of our available reserves. Our teaching staff contractually must notify the district of retirements by March 1st, so future drafts of the budget might include more retirements, which would also help address our budget gap. As I mentioned, one of the biggest areas of concern, of course, is the projected state aid for next year, which is specifically the $3.4 million reduction in foundation aid. So we do have 2 board trustee seats open for 24-25, and those nominating petitions for those seats will be available at the district office on March 4th. Our next 3 budget work sessions will take place on March 12th, 26th, and April 11th here in the Beach Street Auditorium. We will be discussing curriculum and instruction on March 12th, buildings and grounds and school safety, as well as the propositions on the ballot on March 26th, and revenue and state aid on April 11th, hopefully assuming we have new state aid numbers. Nominating petitions for the board trustee seats are due to district office by April 22nd. We will be adopting our budget on April 16th, and our budget hearing will take place on May 7th. And our budget vote will be held on May 21st in the high school, as always, from 7 to 9. Does anyone have any questions regarding this or anything that was in our binders?